The Five Nights at Freddy's movie is such an anomaly to me. I saw it last weekend, and I was simultaneously surprised and let down at the same time. I wasn't expecting this movie to be any good. The writing was on the wall from the first trailer, and the fact that it was announced all the way back in 2015 didn't bolster any confidence for me. Had it just been your average terrible B-movie horror flick based off a popular IP, I probably wouldn't even be talking about it at all. But after watching it, I was really surprised with what it was attempting to be. Don't get me wrong, it's still terrible, but there's enough interesting things in it that it tries to do that it's almost frustrating, because buried somewhere in this mess might have actually been a really solid movie. I'm going to keep this review spoiler free, but if you guys are interested in a story analysis of this film, I'd love to go over it because it's really hard to talk about without spoiling what happens in the story. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. Like I said, I was expecting it to be completely forgettable, but after thinking about everything that happens in it, I realized there was actually a lot to talk about with it. So here we go. Here's my review of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Before we get into it, let's quickly talk about this game's lore. I am by no means a lore expert whatsoever. I played the first 4 games when they came out, and there's like, 7 or 8 now? So I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert. I also don't think anybody is a lore expert because the lore of this series seemingly exists to throw off anybody trying to get concrete answers on things. What's interesting though is how much the movie references the game's lore while still doing their own original story. Josh Hutcherson's character is named Mike Schmidt, in reference to the name of the character you play as in the first game. But it's not like the events of the game take place in the film at all. The setup for everything is completely different. So while people who haven't played the games can enjoy this original story, it can be kind of confusing for people who have played the games. Or at least, I was confused at times. It clearly isn't connected at all to the game's timeline, but it does borrow many story events in order to craft its own narrative. You'll have to think of the FNAF movies as its own separate timeline, which, if it does receive sequels, will be interesting to see where this particular story will go. So without spoiling too much more, it just might come as a bit confusing to people who are familiar with the game's story. The thing you'll notice right out of the gate while watching this movie is how very not scary it is. What surprised me is that it's less of a horror movie and more of a narrative drama. It's very story focused, which I was not expecting at all. The story leaves a lot to be desired, but I gotta say I do appreciate the attempt. The movie was always going to have a PG-13 rating in order not to alienate a majority of the game's young fan base. So while they obviously weren't going to be super edgy with the film, I appreciate that it understands exactly what it wants to be, choosing to be less edgy and more story-focused. But people will be disappointed by this. If you're looking for a fun slasher horror movie, then you probably should look somewhere else. This movie takes its time with the story and has very little actual killing within it. Not only is it really not scary, but it's actually surprising how very few jump scares are in the film. You'd think that a horror series that was made popular from their jump scares as a selling mechanic of the game would feature way more jump scares in their film adaptation. Along with little jump scares or real killing in the movie, I also just see the animatronics as not being all that scary either. They just look a lot goofier when standing next to real life people. The games didn't have this problem because there weren't any real people to compare them to, so the uncanny valley sort of feeling was really effective. But here, they just look even more like cartoons. I honestly would have much preferred a different, more lifelike interpretation of the animatronics, instead of just a complete copy of how they look in the games. Because there really is just something about them that doesn't look real. They just feel off, at least to me. Now they do have their moments where they are used in a more creepy or disturbing way, but honestly, it's few and far between. I felt like any time they were intentionally trying to be creepy, it just never really worked for me. But it does come down to personal preference at the end of the day. Another thing that kind of bothered me about the animatronics was the lack of differences in personality between them. In the game, you had to deal with each one very differently, as they each had their own unique quirks and gameplay mechanics that made each one stand out. Bonnie is the most active and makes faces at the camera, Chica has her cupcake, Foxy is all alone in Pirate's Cove and is the only one you can see running down the hallway, and Freddy is just overpowered and gets to be the one that kills you if you lose power.
See ya, chump.
But in the movie, they're all basically the same character. There isn't any distinction given to them. They all serve the same purpose in the plot. They all get to kill one person each, and they're honestly barely even focused on in the story. It's weird, being that their distinct personalities in the game is what made them so iconic and beloved in the fandom. But here, they're just the exact same. Like, if you're a fan of Bonnie specifically, I couldn't even really tell you the things that Bonnie does in the movie. And that's something else I mentioned earlier. There's very little killing in this movie, and they're all given exactly a total of 1 kill each, none of which are really that memorable. Maybe 1 or 2 of them got to me, but really there's just not much going on in the killing side of things. As a matter of fact, I think Chica's cupcake actually gets a higher kill count than all of them. I don't know. I feel like what should be a big draw of this movie, watching our favorite animatronics kill people, just feels like more of an afterthought in this story. I really feel like this was a huge missed opportunity to do something really creepy and cool. I'll take a moment to compliment the things I liked really quickly. If you're a fan of the series, you'll at the very least have a good time with this movie. There are plenty of references and jokes for the community to enjoy. References to the other games in the series, inside jokes from the fandom, and some pretty fun cameos as well. The only thing that's really disappointing? No Markiplier. The end credits music is even the Living Tombstone's Five Nights at Freddy's song. So yeah, this movie is absolutely just a love letter to the fans, and it's definitely enjoyable if you're familiar with the series even a little bit. There were a lot of laughs and applause in my theater, so it's good to note the movie was able to at least accomplish this. Like I said before though, this movie is less focused on being a scary horror movie, and instead is very story focused. I really appreciate this and can actually enjoy what they were trying to do with it. Even the story they're trying to tell is actually kind of interesting. And if anything, it just annoys me, because it makes me feel like this movie really could have been great. I just wish the story made more sense. Without spoiling too much, the focus is on Josh Hutcherson's character, Mike, who suffers from PTSD after having his brother abducted when they were both younger. Now every night, he tries to get into the same mindset of that day in order to try and remember the face of the person that took him. That's a really cool premise. And his obsession with finding his brother's abductor distracts him from his current responsibility of taking care of his little sister. Again, pretty solid premise. And the movie really takes its time focusing on this as opposed to the animatronic killings. I'm going to compliment the story here for a moment and say that I actually do appreciate the cause and effect storytelling. Something movies nowadays don't even bother to attempt anymore. But yes, each event in the story follows something else that happened, and it's kind of refreshing to see. The characters and acting isn't half bad either. Josh Hutcherson is very likable in the main role, as he usually is, and most of the characters around him are very enjoyable. Most of them. Elizabeth Lale's character, Officer Vanessa Monroe, is easily the worst part of this movie. She exists as mainly just an exposition dump to the rest of the characters, and her role and motivations in the story are very confusing. Most of my problems with the story start and end with her. But don't get me wrong, there are many plot holes and issues with the story. Without giving too many details about the story away, the movie's third act turns the entire story into a confusing mess. They reveal a major plot twist at the very end of the movie, which is not only painfully predictable from the very beginning, but also throws everything that happened up until that point into question. From not understanding people's motivations or plans, to introducing new rules right as the movie is about to end. Yeah, the finale is by far the worst part of this movie, and it's the most anticlimactic way to end what I thought was a pretty interesting premise for a story. I'm honestly surprised Scott Cawthon helped to write this story. It just seems way less interesting than the story that's taking place in his games. Again, I really liked the idea for this story, and I feel like I could have seen a way where it worked. But by the ending, it just becomes a confusing mess. A confusing mess that, worse, was kind of boring and really not that scary. That's my full spoiler-free review of Five Nights at Freddy's. Again, I wouldn't have even felt the need to talk about this movie if there wasn't enough good things in it to make me really enjoy my time watching it, in spite of all of its issues. I really do think there is a good movie buried in here somewhere. I just think a lot of the ideas are fumbled away with too many confusing story aspects that are left unanswered. If you'd like to see a full story review with spoilers where I actually go into detail with what I mean, Let me know in the comments because I really do feel like there's a lot to talk about here. But other than that, I really hope you enjoyed my little rant of this movie. A quick update on what's happening with the channel. My final tier of the NFL Iceberg will be released along with probably more iceberg related content. Either way, I just want to thank you for watching this video, and I guess I will see you all next time. So stay safe and take care. Bye bye.